At night, the ocean doesn't look black. It sounds black. The wind scrapes across the surface like sandpaper, and every wave feels like a whispered warning against steel. Now imagine a U.S. warship that, on radar, doesn't look like a ship at all. More like a strange glitch, a shrinking shadow, a maybe. That ship exists, and for years it confused even the people who built it. Because the USS Zumwalt wasn't just designed to fight, it was designed to make the enemy hesitate. Just long enough for the first strike to land. And here's the twist that makes this story deadly. The world can still find Zumwalt, just not fast enough, and not clearly enough, to stop what it might be carrying now. So why did the US spend billions on a destroyer that looked like the future, got criticized like a failure, and then quietly morphed into something far more frightening than its original mission? Tonight, you're going to hear the real story. How stealth at sea isn't invisibility, it's confusion, timing, and a kill chain that breaks at the worst possible second. Picture a normal destroyer silhouette in your mind. A tall mast, obvious edges, antennas like raised shoulders, a shape your brain instantly labels as warship. Now picture Zumwalt, and your brain pauses. Because it doesn't read like a ship. It looks like a dark wedge sliding over water low, faceted, almost unnatural, like someone folded a battleship out of matte black origami. That pause in your brain is the whole point. Modern warfare is speed detect, classify, track, target, fire. If your sensors hesitate, your people hesitate. And if you hesitate, you die. Zumwalt was built to weaponize hesitation. But stealth comes with a price. The more you shape a ship to disappear to sensors, the more you shape it into something that's harder to build, harder to maintain, and harder to fit into the rest of a fleet that runs on standard parts and proven doctrine. That trade-off is the first crack in the Zumwalt story. Let's make stealth simple with something you can feel. Imagine you're in a dark room and someone throws a rubber ball. If it smacks a wall and bounces back loudly, you instantly know where the wall is. Radar is that rubber ball. Most ships are loud walls. Stealth shaping tries to turn the wall into soft, angled curtains, so the bounce doesn't come back clean, and the direction feels wrong. Not perfect silence, just less certainty, less confidence, less time. And the ocean is already a liar. Waves create clutter. Rain creates noise. Coastlines create chaos. Civilian traffic creates doubt. In that mess, the real advantage isn't disappearing. It's forcing the enemy's system to argue with itself long enough for your decision cycle to win. Zumwalt was built to live inside that argument. The Zumwalt idea was born from a specific fear. The shoreline was becoming the battlefield. Not open ocean duels, but messy coastal fights. Where missiles hide on trucks, where small boats blend into fishing traffic, where targets appear and vanish inside cities. The Navy wanted a ship that could creep close, survive long enough, and hit inland targets like a floating precision artillery battery. If you've ever felt the ground tremble when a heavy truck passes, scale that sensation into naval gunfire-controlled force delivered from miles away, again and again. That was the original promise. A stealthy destroyer that could shape the land battle without needing to sail into obvious danger. But the moment you build a ship for a specific war, you gamble that the war will stay the same long enough for your ship to matter. Zumwalt entered the world as the battlefield began evolving faster than the ship could be produced. Step inside the Zumwalt concept, and the first thing you notice isn't a cannon blast, it's a hum. A steady, industrial heartbeat you'd feel through your shoes if you were standing on the deck at night, when the sea air is cold and the ship seems like a quiet city moving through darkness. Zumwalt was built around electricity like a spine. Its integrated power system produces and distributes power like a grid, more like a modern data center than a traditional warship. That matters because the future Navy imagined wasn't just guns and missiles, it was sensors, jammers, networks, and, eventually, weapons that drink electricity like fuel. Think of it like building a house with heavy-duty wiring for rooms you haven't designed yet. It's smart, until the wiring becomes so complex that every upgrade feels like surgery, and every failure becomes a puzzle that has to be solved while the house is still occupied. Now look at the Zumwalt's face, the deckhouse, and why it matters. Traditional ships have shapes that reflect radar in messy, obvious ways. Zumwalt's deckhouse was designed to be radar hostile. Faceted surfaces, carefully managed angles, and materials chosen to reduce reflections. If radar is a flashlight, this structure tries to behave like a dark hoodie in a hallway full of mirrors. But stealth is discipline, not magic. A stealthy shape can be ruined by sloppy emissions, careless radar use, or inconsistent procedures. On a modern ship, stealth is a lifestyle. Rules about what you transmit, when you transmit, how you transmit, and what signatures you leave behind. And every time you add advanced materials and new design choices, you add new maintenance realities: salt, corrosion, vibration, heat cycling, and the brutal truth that the ocean is the world's most patient destroyer of technology. Here's where the story bites. Zumwalt was meant to bring thunder to the shoreline. It carried 2 advanced gun systems, designed for long-range, precision land attack. The idea was elegant. Why spend $1 million missile when a smart projectile can do the job repeatedly, quickly, and with that psychological weight only heavy gunfire delivers? A gun is a drumbeat. It can keep hitting. It can shape behavior. It can force an enemy to hide, scatter, and panic. The Zumwalt's guns were supposed to make coastal defenses feel helpless. But the specialized ammunition required for that promise became wildly expensive, and the plan collapsed under the math. Imagine buying a race car that only runs on fuel so rare that every fill-up costs more than the car. Suddenly, the ship built for a signature mission faced a brutal question. If the guns can't fire the way you planned, what is this ship for now? This is where most failed program stories end. But Zumwalt's doesn't, because ships don't get thrown away. A platform like this is a floating national investment. Steel, systems, training pipelines, dockyard infrastructure, years of human effort. So the Navy looked at Zumwalt like a chess player looks at an unusual piece and asked a colder question. If it can't do the original job, what terrifying job can it do instead? The answer begins with what Zumwalt still has, even without the gun dream: stealth shaping, huge internal volume, and a power architecture built for future weapons. It's like owning a warehouse with hidden rooms and industrial electricity. Maybe the original business plan failed, but the building can still host something dangerous. So the mission started to pivot quietly, not as a headline, but as a practical evolution. And that's where the Zumwalt becomes relevant again, because the modern ocean is turning into a battlefield of long-range strike, drones, and kill chains measured in seconds. Let's make the modern threat picture feel real. Imagine you're on watch, and the sea is calm, but your screens are not. A contact appears as a faint trace. Someone says, "Possible surface track." Another operator hesitates because the return doesn't look right. The symbol flickers. The classification field stays blank for a moment too long. That moment is the battlefield. Modern attacks don't start with a visible enemy ship on the horizon. They start with a detection. Then, a classification. Then, a track. Then, a targeting solution. Steps that form a kill chain. If the chain breaks even once, the shot can fail, the missile can waste itself, or the attacker can lose the initiative. Zumwalt's stealth shaping is designed to poison the early steps of that chain. Not forever, just long enough. Because in high-end warfare, just long enough is often the difference between launching first and being hit first. Here's the simplest way to picture a kill chain: a relay race in a storm. Detection is the first runner. Classification is the second. Tracking is the third. Targeting is the fourth. Fire is the finish line. If any runner slips, the baton drops and the whole attack stutters. Zumwalt tries to make the track slippery right where the enemy expects grip. And when a ship also carries advanced sensors and networked combat systems, it can create something that feels unfair. It can see you clearly while you're still debating what it's looking at. That's the first terrifying advantage. Information asymmetry. Not just I'm hidden, but I'm earlier. Earlier to detect, earlier to decide, earlier to act. In a world where missiles cross hundreds of miles and drones extend eyes beyond the horizon, being earlier is a weapon. Now let's put you on the bridge, listening first, when the ship is doing what it was built to do. You hear low voices clipped by headsets, the soft chirp of system alerts, and the constant, alive hum of power running through the hull like a nervous system. Outside, the ocean is a moving mirror, and the horizon feels too clean, like a line drawn with a ruler. A watch officer stares at a screen where contacts don't look like ships, they look like opinions. A faint return, a shaky track, a symbol that refuses to lock into certainty. And that's the stealth trick at sea. Your enemy's radar isn't asking, "Are you there?" It's asking, "What are you?" If the answer takes too long, the kill chain starts late, and late can be fatal. Here's the rehook. The Zumwalt doesn't need to be invisible to win. It just needs to arrive inside your decision cycle, while you're still clearing your throat to speak. That's why its stealth isn't just shape, it's a whole discipline of signatures, radar reflections, heat, even the way it feels to sensors across different bands. And the wild part is this: the better you are at confusing machines, the more you force humans to do the slowest thing in war. Double check. Most people think stealth is a cloak. In reality, it's more like stage lighting. You're not disappearing. You're controlling what the audience is allowed to notice, and when they notice it. Radar cross-section is the headline, but the ocean fight is multisensory. Infrared, electronic emissions, acoustic signatures, wake patterns, satellite cues. Even small behavioral tells, like how often a ship pings the world with its own radar. So imagine this. An enemy operator sees a weak, ambiguous radar return. They try another sensor mode. They try another frequency. They ask a supervisor. They request a second opinion from a different node. All of that is time. Meanwhile, Zumwalt is gliding forward, quiet and patient. Not because it's passive, but because patience is part of the weapon. And there's a deeper psychological effect. Uncertainty creates caution. Caution creates delay. Delay creates initiative. That's why stealth at sea is less ninja and more pickpocket. You're not winning by punching harder. You're winning by making the other side realize their wallet is gone only after you're already leaving the building. Now let's talk about the shape that makes Zumwalt look like a sci-fi ship in real life. That inward-leaning hull, the tumble-home form, is one of the first things people notice, and one of the first things critics questioned. Because the ocean doesn't care about aesthetics. It cares about stability, buoyancy, and how a hull behaves when the sea stops being polite. In calm water, tumble-home can help manage reflections and reduce certain signatures. But in rough seas, every hull form has trade-offs. Waves slam, spray blasts across the bow like shattered glass. Wind shoves hard on the ship's superstructure. And all of that asks one brutal question. Does the platform stay predictable when nature is trying to throw you sideways? Here's the rehook. Zumwalt's stealth isn't just less visible, it's less familiar. And unfamiliar platforms always trigger fear in organizations because doctrine is built on predictability. A fleet loves ships that behave like ships. Zumwalt behaves like an argument between what's possible and what's comfortable. Let's pull back and look at the promise that sold this ship to the future. The Navy wanted a destroyer that could go close to shore, survive in contested zones, and deliver precision effects inland. Not just with missiles, but with repeatable, affordable fire, like a sniper that can fire again and again without reloading a $1 million round. That's why the two advanced gun systems mattered so much in the original vision. They weren't just weapons, they were identity. The idea was, bring a stealthy ship near the coast, keep it hard to target, and let it hammer targets with precision. The kind of pressure that makes an enemy feel hunted even when they can't see the hunter. But then the math turned vicious. The specialized ammunition became so expensive that the whole affordable, repeatable fire concept shattered. And when that happened, Zumwalt didn't just lose a weapon, it lost its narrative. It became the most dangerous kind of platform in bureaucracy. A marvel without a clear job description.
Here's what people miss. When a ship loses its original mission, it doesn't become useless. It becomes available. And availability is powerful if the platform still has the right fundamentals: space, power, cooling margins, and stealth shaping that can matter in a high-end fight. Think of Zumwalt like a high-tech warehouse built for one product line that got canceled. The building is still there, and it's still special. It has big doors, hidden storage, industrial electricity, and room to install something new. That's why the failed ship narrative is too simple. The real question becomes, what new payload would make this hull worth the trouble? The answer isn't a smaller mission. It's a bigger one. When you start hearing words like strategic strike and hypersonic, Zumwalt stops sounding like a coastal gunship and starts sounding like a stealthy launch platform, something that changes calculations across entire regions. And when that pivot happens, the ship's weirdness starts looking less like a bug and more like the point. Now let's talk about the ship's hidden muscle. Its vertical launch cells. Zumwalt uses a different style than many older destroyers, a system designed with survivability in mind, spreading launch cells along the edges of the ship rather than clustering everything in one place. The logic is simple and brutal. If one area gets hit, you don't want the whole ship's magazine to become a single catastrophic problem. Picture it like storing fireworks. If you put them all in one closet, one spark ends the house. If you distribute them carefully, you can absorb damage and still function. That's the philosophy behind how Zumwalt carries missiles. And it's one more clue that the ship was built with modern threats in mind: hits, fragments, shock, and the chaos of real combat. When people hear stealth ship, they imagine it hiding. But Zumwalt's real talent might be surviving long enough to keep launching. Stealth buys you time. Distributed survivability helps you spend that time without dying the first time someone guesses correctly. Let's step into the crew spaces for a second, because automation is one of the most underrated parts of this story. Zumwalt was designed to operate with a much smaller crew than traditional destroyers. Fewer people means lower lifetime cost, fewer bunks, fewer mouths to feed, and more space for systems. It sounds efficient, and it is, until you remember the ocean's favorite hobby: breaking things. A smaller crew changes the feel of the ship. Less chatter in passageways, fewer footsteps, more quiet corners. It can feel almost eerie, like a high-end facility rather than a crowded warship. But it also means fewer hands for damage control, fewer bodies for maintenance surges, fewer people to do the 1,000 small tasks that keep a ship healthy under stress. Zumwalt wasn't just a ship. It was a bet that software and automation could replace manpower without replacing resilience. That's a bold bet in a world where the first rule of naval survival is simple. When something goes wrong at sea, you don't call a repair truck. You become your own repair truck. Now we hit the part that turns this into a thriller instead of a brochure: complexity. Every breakthrough system comes with invisible baggage: supply chains, specialized parts, training pipelines, integration testing, software updates, and the harsh reality that a warship is a floating system of systems. When you change many systems at once, you don't just build a new ship. You build a new ecosystem. That's why Zumwalt's small class size matters. A large fleet class can justify specialized infrastructure. A tiny class becomes a unicorn, powerful, rare, and expensive to keep healthy. It's like owning 3 prototype supercars with custom parts. You can do incredible things, but every repair is a project, and every upgrade is a negotiation with physics. This is where the Zumwalt's reputation got shaped. Not by one failure, but by the simple friction of being different. And yet, different can be deadly, because enemies train on patterns. When you break patterns, you break predictions. Zumwalt's greatest strength might be that it refuses to be normal. Let's make the strategic pivot feel real with a scenario. Imagine a crisis building far from the U.S. coast. Tension rising, surveillance satellites watching, submarines lurking, aircraft patrolling, and every major power measuring reaction time. In that world, having a stealthy surface platform that can carry very large, very advanced weapons becomes a different kind of deterrence. Because deterrence isn't only, I can hit you. It's, I can hit you from angles you can't comfortably cover. A stealthy platform complicates defense planning. It forces larger search areas. It forces more patrols. It forces more sensors. It forces more money. And while your opponent is spending that money and spreading thin, you've already gained leverage. That's why the Zumwalt story doesn't end with expensive mistake. It bends into strategic wildcard. When its mission shifts toward long-range strike, the ship stops being a niche tool for shore bombardment and starts being a piece that changes the map. Now let's bring drones and sensor networks into the picture, because the ocean is becoming a battlefield of eyes. Unmanned scouts extend detection ranges. Satellites provide persistent hints. Aircraft and ships share tracks. In that environment, stealth doesn't disappear. It evolves. You're not hiding from one radar anymore. You're trying to avoid becoming a clean, shared, confident track inside a network. So the stealth goal becomes, don't let the network agree. If one sensor sees you faintly, but another doesn't confirm, the system hesitates. If the system hesitates, the operator hesitates. And if the operator hesitates, the timeline slips. Zumwalt's shaping and signature discipline are tools designed to make that agreement harder, especially at longer ranges, where ambiguity is easier to create. In the network age, the deadliest thing isn't being unseen. It's being seen too late to matter. That's why Zumwalt's design, even with all its controversy, still speaks directly to the future. It's built for a world where seconds are currency and certainty is rare. And here's where the story turns almost cinematic again. The Zumwalt looks like a ship from tomorrow, but it was born from yesterday's lessons. After decades of watching anti-ship missiles get faster, seekers get smarter, and coastal threats multiply, designers started asking a terrifying question. What if the ocean becomes a place where big, obvious ships are simply too easy to target? Stealth shaping is one response. Another response is deception. Decoys, electronic warfare, jamming, emissions control, spoofing. Zumwalt is interesting because it sits at the intersection. It tries to be hard to see, hard to classify, and hard to target, while still carrying the kind of weapons that make you strategically relevant. People argued about whether Zumwalt was a good ship, but that argument misses the bigger point. The ship is a symptom. It's what happens when a military tries to sprint into a new era before the era is fully understood. And that's exactly why its story is valuable, because it reveals what the future demands and what the present resists. If you want to feel the Zumwalt's philosophy in one word, it's compression. Compress detection time. Compress reaction windows. Compress the enemy's confidence. Compress the distance between we think something is there and we're already under threat. Think about how panic works. Panic happens when you realize you don't have enough time to do the safe thing. That's what stealthy strike platforms can create. Not fear of being hit someday, but fear of being hit before your system fully wakes up. Zumwalt was designed to create that time pressure, quietly, persistently, without drama. And this is the part most people don't expect. The Zumwalt might not be the future because it's perfect. It might be the future because it demonstrates what modern combat rewards. Platforms that are flexible enough to change missions, strong enough to carry new payloads, and strange enough to break the enemy's pattern recognition. Let's talk about flexibility, like it's a survival trait. The Navy's threat environment changes faster than shipbuilding timelines. A destroyer can take a decade from concept to full operational maturity. Meanwhile, adversaries iterate missiles, drones, sensors, and tactics in months. That mismatch is why platforms that can evolve are precious. Zumwalt's massive electrical capacity and internal volume were built with that evolution in mind. It's the kind of ship that can absorb new systems, advanced sensors, electronic warfare upgrades, potentially new defensive weapons, as technology matures. It's not just a warship, it's a chassis for the Navy's future experiments, but with the uncomfortable twist that it's not an experiment in a lab. It's an experiment that has to sail in real oceans and face real threats. So, when you hear critics say, it didn't match the original plan, the smarter question is, what if the original plan was always too narrow? What if the real purpose was to build a platform that could carry whatever the next decade demands, especially the kind of weapons too big, too power-hungry, or too disruptive for older designs? Now, a quick sensory detour because ships have personalities, and Zumwalt's personality is restraint. Imagine walking a quiet corridor at night. You hear ventilation, distant pumps, the occasional metallic tick as the hull flexes with the sea. The lighting is controlled. The spaces feel modern, almost clinical, like a high-tech facility that happens to be moving through salt water. That facility feeling is part of the message. Zumwalt is a ship built for systems warfare, where data, power, sensors, and network integration matter as much as steel and explosions. It's a floating node in a larger machine, designed to survive and strike in an environment where the first person to be confidently identified is often the first person to be targeted. The more you rely on advanced systems, the more your weakest link becomes integration. Not one weapon, not one radar, the glue, the software, the procedures, the human training. And that's why the Zumwalt story is not just about a ship. It's about whether modern militaries can actually handle the complexity they keep inventing. So where does this go next? The Zumwalt is no longer judged by the mission it was born with. It's judged by the mission it's becoming. And that mission revolves around the idea that a stealthy surface platform can carry weapons that change strategy, not just tactics. What happens when a ship designed for coastal precision fire gets reimagined as a launcher for next-generation strike, while still needing to survive in a world full of satellites, drones, submarines, and missiles that don't care how futuristic your hull looks? Because the scariest version of the Zumwalt isn't the one that tries to do everything. It's the one that shows up quietly, forces the enemy network to hesitate, and then launches a payload that makes the entire region redraw its assumptions about distance and safety. The pivot begins with a problem you can almost feel in your hands. Modern strike weapons are getting larger, faster, and more demanding, while most ships were designed around older standard sizes. If a destroyer is a backpack, the newest payloads feel like trying to stuff a sleeping bag and a bowling ball into the same zipper. Zumwalt, with its volume and margins, feels more like a reinforced case with spare compartments you forgot you had. That's why, when the original shore bombardment dream dimmed, the conversation shifted toward a darker question. What if this stealthy hull becomes a launcher for the kind of weapons that change regional math, not just tactical outcomes? And when you look at the ocean the way planners do, rings on a map, reaction times measured in minutes, any platform that can move quietly, confuse early detection, and still reach far beyond the horizon becomes a strategic irritant. Not because it's unbeatable, but because it forces everyone else to plan heavier, wider, and more expensively. Listen to the sea like a battlefield of distance. There's the near field, waves slapping steel, wind cutting across the deck, the subtle vibration through your knees when power surges below. Then there's the far field, satellites overhead, aircraft at altitude, sensors sharing tracks, algorithms trying to turn noise into certainty. Modern naval war happens in both worlds at once. In that environment, stealth is not a cloak. It's a delay in detection, a delay in classification, a delay in tracking confidence. And delays don't sound dramatic. But they are deadly, because kill chains are relay races. If the baton is dropped once, the shot can miss, the intercept can fail, or the attacker can lose the initiative. Zumwalt was built to live inside that seam, harder to read at range, harder to label quickly, harder to turn into a clean shared track across multiple sensors. The ship doesn't need to be invisible. It just needs the enemy's network to hesitate. At the exact moment hesitation becomes irreversible. The most misunderstood part of the Zumwalt story is that a mission change doesn't automatically mean a platform failed. Sometimes it means the platform survived long enough for the world to change around it. Ships take years to build, but threats evolve in months. So a hull that can pivot is a kind of insurance policy. Expensive, yes, but rare. Think of Zumwalt like a high-tech warehouse built for one product line that got canceled. The building is still there. The power is still there. The space is still there. And now the only question that matters is what you install inside it. The narrative stops being, "Why did we build this?" and becomes, "What is this quietly becoming?" That's why the ship's weirdness, its shape, its power architecture, its margins, starts looking less like an accident and more like the point. Because the future doesn't reward perfect plans. It rewards platforms that can absorb surprise without breaking. You can feel the cost of being different the first time a fleet tries to normalize a unicorn. A rare class means rare expertise, specialized parts, custom training pipelines, maintenance that feels like a craft instead of a routine. The ship becomes a special event wherever it goes. Watched, photographed, discussed, mythologized. That myth cuts both ways. One side calls it the future, the other calls it fragile. And the ocean, as always, plays referee with salt, vibration, corrosion, and the kind of stress that doesn't care about PowerPoint. Because the most advanced ship in the world still has to survive boring things. Storms, tight schedules, supply constraints, and the relentless grind of real operations. But there's a third perspective that matters even more. The enemies. An opponent doesn't need your ship to be perfect. They need it to be unpredictable. They need it to force worst-case planning. And worst-case planning is how budgets bleed long before missiles fly. Picture an operations center lit by screens, more than ceiling lights. Cooling fans give the air a dry, constant hiss. Analysts watch shipping lanes, satellite passes, patrol patterns. Most contacts have profiles, expected behavior, typical signatures, predictable routes. Then one contact doesn't. It appears faintly. It refuses clean classification. It sits at the edge of certainty. Different sensors don't confirm it at the same time. And the system does the one thing commanders hate. It asks for more time. More time to verify, more time to cross-check, more time to be sure. That sentence, "We're not sure," is the real weapon. Not forever, not magically, but long enough to compress response options. And if the platform behind that uncertainty can carry serious strike payloads, the value of even small delays increases sharply. Uncertainty stops being an annoyance and becomes a strategic problem. Now bring your attention down from the map to the ship's body. Zumwalt's stealth shaping isn't just aesthetics. It's geometry designed to be rude to radar, angles that deflect energy away instead of bouncing it back cleanly. It's also signature discipline by design. Hiding sensors, reducing exposed clutter, managing how the ship presents itself to machines that are paid to classify threats. But at sea, stealth is never a single trick. A ship can reduce radar returns and still be hinted at by satellites, infrared cues, wake patterns, or electronic emissions. That's why stealth becomes a lifestyle. When you transmit, how you transmit, and whether you treat every emission like a flare in the night. So the question isn't, can it be seen? The question is, can it be seen clearly enough, soon enough, by enough sensors at once to stop what it's there to do? And that enough at once is exactly where modern networks either win or stutter. Zumwalt was also built around power in a way that feels like the future humming under your feet. Instead of being a ship where systems feel separate and mechanical, It behaves more like a grid, generation and distribution feeding everything else. That matters because modern naval warfare is drifting toward tools that are power-hungry, advanced sensors, electronic warfare, and defensive systems that don't fit neatly into old assumptions. If you've ever stood near a massive generator, you know that feeling, the low vibration, the sense that there's muscle behind the walls. On Zumwalt, that muscle is electrical, and it changes what upgrades are possible over the ship's life. The trade-off is that grids come with complexity, software, integration, procedures, training that has to be precise, because modern systems don't just break loudly, they fail quietly, and quiet failures in combat are the ones that get people hurt. Then there's survivability, and it's not glamorous, but it's everything. A surface ship lives with the terrifying truth that when something goes wrong, help is not minutes away. The ship is the help. Damage control is not a side job. It's the difference between limping home and not coming home at all. Automation and smaller crews promise efficiency, but they also change the texture of resilience. Fewer people means fewer hands when multiple failures happen at once. It means training has to be sharper, drills have to be cleaner, and systems have to carry more of the burden that humans use to absorb through sheer labor. Zumwalt is part of a bigger bet that advanced automation can reduce crew without reducing the ship's ability to fight through damage. It's a bet that feels modern, and it also feels risky, because the ocean doesn't care how advanced your interface is when smoke fills a corridor. The original identity of Zumwalt was tied to a very specific promise: shore support, precision fire, the idea that a stealthy ship could approach contested coastlines and deliver repeatable effects inland. That promise collapsed when the economics of the specialized ammunition turned vicious, and suddenly the signature mission became a dead end. But the hull didn't disappear. It stayed, and once the Navy accepted that the original plan wouldn't define the ship's future, the platform became something else, a carrier for whatever weapon system best matched its strengths. Stealth shaping, power margins, internal volume, and the ability to evolve. That's why the story feels like it changes genres. It starts like a coastal artillery tale. Then, it becomes an acquisition controversy. And then it turns into something closer to a strategic thriller, where the payload matters more than the original brochure. Imagine standing on deck at dawn. The air tastes like salt and cold metal. The ship's surfaces drink light instead of reflecting it, and the ocean looks like brushed steel stretching to a pale horizon. Below you, power is running, quiet, constant, patient, like the ship is holding its breath. Now imagine being an adversary forced to defend multiple coastlines, multiple choke points, multiple islands, with finite sensors and finite patrol assets. You want certainty. You want clean tracks. You want predictable detection ranges. And then a platform shows up that blurs itself in the seams and still threatens deep. That's when deterrence changes flavor. It stops being "we can match you ship for ship" and becomes "we can force you to spread thin." Spread thin is how mistakes happen. Spread thin is how fatigue sets in. Spread thin is how a single ambiguous contact becomes a crisis. The hypersonic conversion storyline matters because it changes the ship's role from support to reach. A shore bombardment platform is tactical. A long-range strike platform can be strategic because it threatens high-value targets and forces higher-level planning responses. And hypersonic weapons, whatever your opinion of the hype, have a simple psychological effect. They compress time. They compress warning. They compress interception windows. They force defenders to act faster with less certainty. And acting fast with less certainty is where bad decisions breed. So when you imagine a stealthy platform carrying that kind of reach, the stealth doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to buy enough confusion early that the defender's timeline starts late. Late is where interception becomes hope instead of plan. Now, let's be honest about limitations, because credibility matters in a listening-first documentary. A surface ship is never truly hidden in a world of satellites, aircraft, and persistent surveillance. Stealth shaping can reduce certain detection modes and complicate classification, but it can't erase the ocean's own tells: wake, context, probability, and the simple fact that humans can still see with eyes. So the real advantage becomes conditional. It depends on weather, it depends on range, it depends on enemy sensor quality, it depends on emission discipline. It depends on whether the network can confidently agree on what it's seeing fast enough to act. That conditional advantage is still valuable because modern war is not about guarantees. It's about stacking small advantages until the other side runs out of time. And time, more than armor, is the resource that disappears first in a high-end fight. There's also a lesson here about procurement that feels almost universal. When you stack too many new technologies onto one platform, you don't just build a ship, you build an ecosystem. You build new training pipelines, new software baselines, new maintenance routines, new supply chains, and every one of those has to work under stress. That's why the class being small changes everything. With only a few hulls, every unique part becomes harder to justify. Every specialized skill becomes rarer, and every upgrade becomes a major project. The ship becomes exceptional, and exception is expensive. But exceptional also creates advantage. Enemies train on patterns, they build models, they rehearse response plans. A platform that refuses to fit cleanly into old categories forces new thinking, and new thinking costs time. In a competition, forcing your opponent to spend time is not trivial. It's pressure. If you want the simplest takeaway so far, it's this: Zumwalt is less a ship and more a question that keeps moving. Where is it? What is it carrying? What mission is it built for now? What assumptions does it break? And the power of a moving question is that it forces a moving defense. You can't fortify one spot. You can't rely on one sensor. You can't assume one timeline. You have to build depth, redundancy, and persistence. And those are expensive, even before anyone fires a shot. That's why the ship's story matters, even if the class is small. It acts like a prototype of a future logic. Stealth shaping plus power margins plus adaptable payloads. In an era where the kill chain is the real battlefield and seconds are traded like currency. Now bring it back to the human level, because ships don't fight, people do. A crew living inside a platform like Zumwalt has to trust systems they can't see working. They have to trust signatures they can't measure with their own senses. They have to operate with discipline that feels almost ritual. Emissions, control, procedures, timing, coordination. That discipline is the invisible armor. The ship's shape is only the beginning. The real stealth is behavior, what you broadcast, how predictable you are, how cleanly you operate in the fog of sensor noise. That's why two ships with similar hardware can perform very differently in the real world. One is disciplined, the other is casual. And when you imagine the stress of a high-end scenario, jamming, decoys, ambiguous tracks, conflicting sensor inputs, the platform that stays coherent inside its own bubble gains a kind of calm power. Calm power makes decisions earlier. Earlier decisions create initiative. Initiative is the most addictive drug in war. So what does success look like for a ship like Zumwalt? It doesn't look like a perfect scorecard. It looks like leverage. It looks like forcing an opponent to spend more resources for the same confidence. It looks like compressing their timelines and expanding your options. It also looks like learning. Even if you believe the program was too expensive, the technical tuition matters. Integrated power, automation philosophy, stealth shaping choices, survivability approaches. Those lessons don't stay trapped in one class. They spill into the next designs, the next upgrades, the next operational doctrines. And that may be the most honest legacy. Zumwalt is a bridge between eras. It connects a Navy built for yesterday's wars to a Navy preparing for a sensor-saturated future where visibility is constant and certainty is rare. If you zoom out far enough, the Zumwalt becomes a symbol of a bigger strategic argument. Do you build many proven ships or a few revolutionary ones? Proven ships give you predictable strength. Revolutionary ships give you unpredictable options. Predictable strength wins steady conflicts. Unpredictable options can deter, disrupt, and surprise. The Navy didn't fully get the fleet of Zumwalts once imagined. But it did get something else. A small number of platforms that can be repurposed into roles that weren't cleanly available before. And in an era of rapid change, repurposing is not a consolation prize. It's survival strategy. So when people ask whether the ship was worth it, the answer depends on what you value. Certainty today, or options tomorrow. And history tends to reward options right before the world changes. Now let's end where we began, with the ocean at night. Picture the horizon with no city lights, only stars, and a faint smear of moon on water. The ship's wake is a quiet scar behind it, and the wind turns every exposed edge into a whisper. Somewhere inside the hull, power hums, steady and patient, like a held breath. A stealth ship isn't a magic trick. It's a timing machine. It doesn't erase reality. It reshapes the enemy's ability to react to reality in time. And in a modern naval fight, reaction time is the difference between defense and impact. That's why Zumwalt still matters. Not because it's perfect, and not because it's invisible, but because it represents a future where the most valuable ships are the ones that can stay ambiguous early, stay coherent under stress, and carry enough reach to make uncertainty dangerous. So here's the final thought, to leave in your head like a low, persistent engine note. The Zumwalt is the kind of platform that makes everyone else work harder just to feel normal. Harder to detect. Harder to classify. Harder to plan against. Harder to defend. And when a ship forces that much extra effort, it has already changed the battlefield before a single weapon launches. If you had to choose one advantage on the modern ocean, stealth shaping, sensor fusion, electronic warfare, or sheer numbers, what would you bet your fleet on, and why? And the next time you hear the phrase, stealth ship, remember what it really means at sea. Not invisibility, but confusion, delivered on purpose at the exact moment it hurts the most.